Hello everyone, good morning. So today I want to present an iPad game for children with autism. I'm Beibin from Seattle Children's and the University of Washington. And thanks for all the collaborators on the list. And as you may already know, children with autism usually have social deficits, language impairment, and repetitive behavior. On the right-hand side, you can see a video of a child rocking his body, which is a representation of the repetitive behavior. And in the last 2 decades, the population of ASD have increased dramatically. And nowadays, in every 68 children, 1 is affected by autism. And boys are 5 times more likely than girls to have autism. The average cost to care a child with autism is about $60,000 per year for medical care. And the problem with autism is because it's hard to diagnose. There is no biological marker for that, which means it requires lots of expertise to diagnose autism. And in this study, we want to focus on executive functioning skills. And we study 3 main categories of the EF skills. The first one is the shifting skill, which is also known as mental flexibility, which describes one's ability to redirect their attention from one fixation to another. And the second one is the inhibitory control skills, which is a skill to inhibit their impulses and response to some stimulus. And the last one is the short-term memory, which is a subset of the working memory, describes people's ability to hold a small amount of information in their mind. Actually, the EF skills are already well studied in the Autism Society. But unfortunately, not many people have studied the connection between the social deficits and the EF skill deficits. For instance, we know the ASD performs better on the nonverbal IQ test than the verbal IQ test. But we still don't know the connection between the verbal IQ, the social deficits, and the EF skill deficits. And moreover, many previous HCI literatures works only on the social aspect of the EF skills or the social deficits. For instance, they have face recognition, expression recognition, activity recognition, and maybe some storytelling for children with autism. And usually they have little connection with the clinical background, and usually they have a small sample size between 10 to 30 children. And in this study, we want to compare both the social part and the non-social part of autism, specifically for the EF skills. And we also want to connect to a strong clinician background and to recruit large sample size. So we decided to design an app. And you might think, okay, apps, it sounds like a cliche 10 years ago. That's true. Due to a study 2 years ago, we found out there are already thousands of apps designed specifically for autism. But unfortunately, many of them are not usable at all because they are created by people who do not understand autism. So our goal is to create a fun and convenient game for children with autism. And we want to connect to clinical tools and measure both the social and non-social part for the EF skills. And in order to make an app really valuable for the Autism Society, we brought in lots of experts from Seattle Children's and the Yale Medical School. So in this app, there are 3 smaller games. The first one is a shifting game. There are 4 targets showing on the screen, and the child have to guess which one is the correct answer. And for this one, for here right now, the right answer is red fractals. So the children should select all the red fractals from the screen. And the hidden row will change secretly every 10 trials. And the child should learn the shifting of the row by themselves. And the inhibitory game is similar to the go, no-go task. They should touch the screen as fast as possible until they see an angry face here in the social inhibitory game. And it's similar in the non-social inhibitory game. They should stop touching the screen until they see the stop sign. And the last game is a memory game. It's similar to many other memory games. They will first see few targets, and after 10 seconds, they should find out the targets they memorized. As you can see, the game is actually very simple and straightforward. One more time, simple and straightforward. But however, there are lots of design decisions laid behind. Actually, the whole game comes from our prototype in a Kinect system. As you can see, we also have the 3 same games in the Kinect system, but there is no social component here. But however, I like Kinect. You can combine the exercise video game together, and we have fancy IR cameras built inside. We have some pilots data, but we don't have any children's data for this experiment. Can you guess why? Any guesses? No? Okay, the first of all, we need an empty room to set up the experiment, which might be very expensive in Seattle. And also the second, the calibration takes maybe more than 5 minutes, and the children with autism may get bored after 5 minutes, so it takes lots of efforts. And the third, the computer vision algorithm for Kinect is perfect for adults and adolescents, but it's not working very well for young children, particularly for 5-year-old children. So we need to redesign the game, make it more convenient, and our target is an iPad app. So I redesigned the first version of the game and include the social components here. But there are some small problems. First, I use emoji as a social stimulus here. But for adults, we can see some expression here, but for children, it might be too abstract. So we need to use real human face rather than the abstract emoji. And second, the target is so small. It's very similar to the normal iPad games you download from App Store. But young children usually have deficits in the fine motor skills. We don't want this to influence them. So we need to make the target larger and make them move slower. And there are some other small issues. For instance, the score system is not visible on the upper corner, and the sound is not meaningful, the boing bing sound, which is not shown here, and the background is too distracting. So I designed the second version of this one. It's very similar to the screenshot I show, but there are some things here. So first, I changed the scoring system at the health bar at the top, and then I use a real stimuli for the human face and the fractals to represent the social and the non-social stimulus, and I make the stimulus standing here and not moving at all. This is more like a psychology experiment and is less like a game. I want a dynamic game because I like Fruit Ninja, so I make a dynamic version again. And there are many other decisions I made on the way. For instance, we reduced the game difficulty, particularly for the memory game and the shifting game. And we add more instructions and sound effects to the game. And we begin to record accelerometer and gyroscope data at the early 2017s. And we include multi-language support. And we also reject some other ideas. For instance, we don't want to use black and white stimulus, even though they are more controlled in hue and saturation. And we don't want to use cartoon animations, for instance, Pikachu, because it's hard to analyze the social component for the cartoon characters. And we also have some holiday versions, for instance, the Halloween version last year. It is just for fun, and the data are not collected for analysis. And here's the result. We recruited a large sample size, which is 65 participants into this study, and only 3 of them didn't finish this game because they cannot understand the rule, which means the game is well designed and most children can understand the rule. And there is no age difference, no significant age difference between the ASD group and the non-ASD group. There is no significant difference between the male group and female group. And we recorded all the feedback from the children and their parents, which will be very helpful in our future. And because this is a gender session, I made a slides for gender specifically. As you can see, the first 2 rows are for ASD population, and the last 2 rows are for the non-ASD population. As we can see, in the non-ASD population, females perform better than male, but in the ASD population, the males are better. This is actually consistent with the fact girls usually mature faster than boys, but in the ASD population, even the number of girls is less than the number of boys. However, girls are more severely affected than boys. But the average is not so meaningful, so I have a plot with everybody in the slides. As you can see, the x-axis is the inhibitory accuracy for the non-social game, and the y-axis is the inhibitory accuracy for the social game. This is a very busy visualization, but we can get lots of information from here. For instance, you can see the average for the social stimulus is about 92%, but for the non-social one is only 75%-ish, which suggests the angry face is much more salient than the stop sign, and we need to increase the difficulty for the social inhibitory game. And also the marker size represents the age of the children, and the young children are usually below the average, and the older children are mostly above the average. And the marker type represents the diagnosis, and you can see on the bottom right corner, most of them are non-ASD population. One of our main goals is to find a group difference, and the previous plot is not very meaningful, and we need to do ANOVA analysis. So for the shifting game, the standard measure is the learning latency, but unfortunately, we didn't find any between-group difference for the learning latency. However, we find between-group difference for the number of wrong guesses, and the children with autism have more wrong guesses in both the social stimulus and the non-social stimulus. And the inhibitory game, we can find a significant group difference in the social stimulus, but not for the non-social stimulus. Our guess is because of floor effect. And for the memory game, there is no significant group difference, but if we control the age and the IQ, then the difference were found. And particularly I want to highlight is inside the ASD group, there is a significant difference between the social stimulus and the non-social stimulus, which suggests children with autism might have social deficits in the short-term memory skills. And as promised, we connected to the clinical tools. As you can see in the first row is the shifting learning latency, which I mentioned in the previous slides, and it is highly correlated with the ABAS general score and ABAS practice score. And also, the social shifting learning latency is highly correlated with verbal IQ, but the non-social one is not. You can find similar pattern in the inhibitory game and the memory game. This suggests dividing the game into the social part and non-social part is very valuable to learn for autism. And as you can see, we have high correlation in both the ABAS general score and the ABAS practical score. And the second column is very interesting. We don't have any significance here. This suggested the three measurements here are not valuable at all to measure the repetitive behavior. So we did analysis for the accelerometer and the gyroscope. Different from many other HCI literatures, people usually attach wearable device on children. We just use the accelerometer and gyroscope directly built in from the iPad. And we don't find any difference for the x-axis, which is the left and the right coordinate. But for the y-axis, which is the forward and backwards, we find a significant difference between the ASD and TD. On the z-axis, which is the upside down coordinate, we find that older children is more various than the younger children. This is intuitive because older children are usually taller and they can manipulate the iPad in more various way. This is very interesting because we don't have any significant difference on the x-axis. It's kind of weird. So we look into the details of the data here. In the plot here, the x-axis is the ADOS repetitive behavior, and the y-axis is the standard deviation of the accelerometer x. If we only focus on the y-axis here, you will find a pattern because you can cluster the data into two groups. And if we set up a threshold, say everyone below 0.02 might play the game on the table, and the other ones may play the game holding the iPad on their hand or on their lap. So we filter out the children who are playing the game on the table, and then we find out a significant correlation with the repetitive behavior. But unfortunately, we only have 10 participants here, so we lost statistical power. And in the future, we might collect more data and analyze more for the accelerometer and gyroscope data. And we will change the difficulty adaptively and extend to more skills, for instance, the social anxiety and the expression recognition. And we want to improve and investigate more on the game, so in order to provide some clinical value eventually. And at last, we want to deploy the app into App Store. In summary, we created a fun and convenient and also useful game for children with autism. And we found out significant between group difference and a high correlation with the clinical tools. Still, we need more investigation to make the game really valuable for the autism society. And we also suggested divide a game into the social and the non-social parts. It's valuable to study autism. And for right now, we have more than 80 participants right now. And the EF game is also modified and applied to study epilepsy. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening to my talk. Thanks for the participants' families and our collaborator, and a special thanks to the SIGCHI community. Thank you.
I think we have time for one question.
Hi, I'm Peter Mahorter from MIT. I was just wondering if you considered a participatory design approach or had people involved that were autistic on the design side of the team?
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
I guess the microphone.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you considered a participatory design approach or had people involved on the design team who were on the spectrum?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, in the design phase, we have lots of experts involved, and we also recruit few, like 3 participants to give us suggestions. Right, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for a lovely session.